As a lifelong Republican, Governor Whitman, why did you decide to back Joe Biden in this presidential election? And how difficult was it for you to go up against your own Republican Party?
It wasn't difficult at all because I felt so deeply that it was the right thing. I have thought from the beginning, I've never felt, actually, put it the other way, I've never felt that Donald Trump had the character or the commitment to be president of the United States. And with a chance to have someone like Joe Biden, who is someone who respects the Constitution and the rule of law, who's a decent man, who's an honest man, who respects our troops, someone who can tone down the rhetoric and reach across the aisles, which he has done continuously in his career, he's the right man for the right time. And that made it very easy for me to do what I did.
You were out there early on this, and other Republicans joined you as well. What did you hear from fellow Republicans who were in your corner, in Joe Biden's corner in this election?
Well, it depended. There were two groups. There were those who were in office, who found it difficult to come out, who would say privately, yes, I'm all for it, keep going. It's great, I'm going to vote for Biden. And there were those who but I can't come out. Like, I can't be public about it. And there were others, those of us and Republicans and independents for Biden, who were largely past office holders, who were saying, look, we've seen all this before. We've been Republicans for a long time. We've served at different capacities in the federal government and state governments. And we know that now's the time to put country ahead of party. And it's okay to vote for Joe Biden, even if you never have voted for a Democrat before. And those people were willing to stand up and say something, but it was easier because you're not in office and therefore not threatened by the president and the administration.
You said Donald Trump was single-minded at working to divide America. In your opinion, Governor, what were the effects, the implications to the fundamental founding principles of the Republican Party?
The Republican Party was founded as the party of Lincoln to free the slaves. We were a party that always respected individuals and individual differences. We could accept them. We had a core set of principles that united us, but we weren't monolithic in how we interpreted those principles. Right now, there really isn't a Republican Party in a functioning sense. What you have is a party of personality. It's a personality cult. When the Republicans didn't even bother to try to adopt a platform at the convention this last summer, they were basically saying, we stand for whatever Donald Trump says we stand for on any particular day. And that's not the definition of a credible party that can really capture the American people and the voters to help them know what you stand for, what your principles are.
Over the last 4 years, maybe some of us have forgotten about those fundamental principles. So, Governor, remind us, what should we understand? What should we know?
Less government interference in your everyday life, keeping taxes low so that people could spend more of their own money without government interference or taking it from them. A strong national defense, an engaged foreign policy, recognizing we were part of the world, and protection of our shared environment. And those were basically the main steadfast principles that we had. And then there were different ways of interpreting those. Some people felt stronger about certain issues within social values, let's say, than others, but we could accept that because we had those core basic values, and they didn't try to define a position on everything, on every conceivable issue that would come before us, but it gave you the grounding. It was respect for the Constitution, respect for the rule of law, respect for the individual, and doing everything you can to empower the individual to improve their own lives, while recognizing the crucial role that the federal government can and must play in certain areas.
You mentioned the Republican convention this year in a garden with no party platform. As someone who attended Republican national conventions with your parents from a very young age, what was your reaction to that?
Well, my first reaction was it was totally inappropriate to be holding it in the People's House at the White House. I'm sorry, the president seems to be perfectly able to hold all sorts of great rallies without social distancing everywhere else in the country, but it was inappropriate to take something that has been traditionally a nonpartisan house belonging to all the people, Republicans, Democrats, independents, whatever, and turn it into a political background. And then it was just a great big rally, 3 days, 4 days of pumping Donald Trump, which, I mean, most conventions are. They're about the candidate, although in the past, conventions have tried to have some basic principles of the functioning party to say, this is who we are, this is what we stand for, and recognizing others. There, there wasn't much of that in this. It was all about Donald Trump.
Let me ask you about the election itself and all of the charges of voter fraud, voter suppression, rigged results, no orderly transition so far of power with Joe Biden. Uh, what are your thoughts as a Republican and how this has unfolded and how the Republican Party leaders are buying into this at this point in time anyway?
Mhm. Well, there are a couple of things to remember. First of all, there's never been an instant that I know of, and I know personally from my own election, my first election, when there were allegations brought up after the fact of improprieties and suppressing the vote within the African American community. If you don't bring up the issues that in where you think there's inappropriate people voting or inappropriate counting of the ballots, if you don't bring them up at the time that those things are supposedly occurring, they didn't occur. You can't go back and manufacture those facts. I mean, if you had poll watchers, there were poll watchers from both parties and independents at the polls checking people. If they saw something wrong, they should have said it then. The same thing with the counting of the ballots. Secondly, the difference in the swing states is big enough that when we have had recounts, do people make mistakes? Of course they do. They're human. I mean, you may find 10, maybe 50. At the most, you get a couple of hundred. That's not going to overturn this election. And what's really troubling to me is that not only do we see the administration refusing to acknowledge it, and they have every right to go to court. I mean, they can go to court. They can try to develop these charges. So far, they've all been thrown out because there's been no proof. There's no there. But they have a right to do that. Let them do that. But at the same time, because you can do this at the same time, they should allow for an orderly transition. We are in a very delicate stage. Every transition between one administration and the next is delicate because nobody's really in charge. So we've got to be worried about this, and to have the Republicans line up and say, yes, this is all right. And they don't say looking for, or if these allegations are true, they say investigate these allegations, investigate what happened. There is no there. It hasn't been proved. And it's like Bill Barr putting out that letter. Now, there was nothing in that letter that he put out that was anything other than standard operating procedure. But it wasn't till the very end that you got to the point where he said, if there are credible allegations, to investigate. If you see any proof, investigate. And that's going to be ignored by most people. And they're going to see this. There was no need, in other words, for him to put that out. The only reason to do that was to stay in favor with the president and help create doubt that there might in fact be all these terrible things that occurred on election day or afterwards that were never, ever brought up at the time.
And of course, we know there will be 2 Georgia Senate races, runoff elections coming up. And this may play into that. Do you think, Governor, to keep that alive, to keep the Republican momentum alive in those elections, and 2 seats Republicans would like to win?
Well, you're going to see more money spent in senatorial races in one state than you've ever seen before in this runoff. I mean, it's all part of keeping power. It's all part of keeping power rather than thinking about the good of the country. The good of the country demands we have an orderly transition.
Speaking of keeping power, in your estimation, is Donald Trump really going to go away? I mean, he got more than 70 million votes.
Right.
He has some 66 million followers on social media. Donald Trump is going to be around for a while. Do you agree?
Well, he has some legal issues that he's going to have to deal with. And he can try to pardon himself, but that's not going to work for New York State. And there are several cases being pursued there. So he's going to have some things on his plate. But no, he can't stand not being in the limelight. So he is going to try. He doesn't care about the country. I mean, he's not a Republican. He really never has been. He was a Democrat, registered independent. He's been everything. He can't stand the idea of being ignored. He's going to hate the fact that he is one of the few presidents not to win re-election, that he was impeached. The Senate did not accept that, but he was impeached by the House. That's how it happens. That will go down on his record, and all the other, well, I would say really bad things that have happened to us over the course of these 4 years are going to be part of his legacy, and he wants to write his own. And as he said to us, people forget, he said way back in the beginning, don't believe what you see, believe what I tell you. Now that's a scary thing in a democracy. That's a Putin type statement. And of course, those are the people he likes.
Well, with all of this division we find ourselves in this country, do you think that we are now in a position where elected officials, the American public, we just take a side and we stay there and we don't listen to the other side? We just lock it and that's it.
Yeah, Kent, that's happening more and more. And that's why I think it's so important that Joe Biden is going to be our next president, because he is going to tone down the rhetoric. He is going to be a steady person. If anyone can really help us start to get back to the point where we're listening to one another so we can have a civil conversation, he's going to help do that. And then the other good news is you've got the Problem Solvers Caucus in the Congress. In each house, you have an equal number of Republicans and Democrats who have joined together. And one of the things they say that if the majority of them agree, if 75% of them agree on a position, on an issue, they'll vote as a bloc. And that's going to become extremely important and valuable as we move forward. That's going to give Joe Biden his base with which to work. And that will help us finally start to answer some of the problems that the American people are facing and by which they're so frustrated. I mean, it's absolutely right. You knew he was going to do it, is take on the coronavirus. We cannot rebuild our economy until we get this virus under control.
I have to ask you, though, Governor, what, in your opinion, is it going to take to rethink, reshape the Republican Party into the future?
I don't know. And I know there are a number of us who are looking at that and very concerned about it. I'm not sure we can, as long as the Mitch McConnells and the Lindsey Grahams and Kevin McCarthy's adhere to the Trump type rhetoric and the Trump approach to politics and to their governing principles, of which they don't seem to have much. I don't know that they can be worked with. I don't know that they want to go beyond the base, because the base, as we have seen, will come out. They will vote. And the other side has been sporadic about that. I mean, yes, the president won 71 million votes, but Joe Biden won over 75 million votes. And so, that is a majority of the popular vote. But will those people keep coming out in the same numbers? That's the concern that these Republicans have, because really what they care about most deeply is holding on to their job.
You've said more people need to vote in primaries. Explain what you mean and how that can be encouraged, Governor.
Well, when you don't vote in primaries, and up until this election, you had the average voter turnout, as I've said before, was 10%, 10 to 12% in primaries. Those were therefore the most partisan people, and they tended to be more on the extremes. So then when it came to the general elections, you were getting 34% turnout for congressional elections, and you were getting 54, 55% for presidential elections. And that's just not great. And what happened was, because you were getting more and more people who were to the extreme winning, you started to get to a point where they couldn't work together. They just couldn't talk to one another in Washington. And people were frustrated because the real issues that affected them were not being addressed. It wasn't that Congress didn't do anything. They were working, they were passing bills, but the big ones, the ones that people saw as meaning they didn't have to work 2 jobs to stay in the same place, that they could offer their children a better life ahead, that they were going to have medical coverage, that they didn't have to worry about that kind of thing. They could keep a roof over their heads. Those things were not being addressed. They did not feel. And so that was the frustration that I believe led to Donald Trump, because they wanted someone that was just going to turn everything upside down. He did, but I don't believe in a way that most of those people wanted.
Governor Whitman, thank you so much for sharing your perspective on the election, on the Republican Party. We appreciate it, and we've gained some insight from you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. My pleasure.
Funding for Governor's Perspectives with Kent Manahan has been provided by New Jersey Manufacturers Insurance Group, Seton Hall University, and Seton Hall School of Law.